This is the final journey for the 3-year-old boy who washed up on the beach in Turkey. His father went back to Syria today to bury his 2 sons and his wife. Good evening and thanks for joining us. The story of that boy captured the attention of the world, but there are thousands of other refugees and migrants whose stories are just as compelling. Today in Hungary, the human tide of migration took a new turn. At least 1,000 people have begun walking. Refused seats on trains and buses out of Hungary, they've set out on foot, hoping to get to a country that will accept them. Tonight, they are on a highway in the dark. Jeff Semple is at a train station nearby. Jeff?
Donna, just when it seemed that this crisis couldn't spiral any further out of control, today police clashed with migrants here at this train station, a fight that ended with hundreds of them being transferred to a refugee center nearby. But many others continue to evade authorities, and today about 1,000 of them quite literally took a walk down Budapest's busiest street. Desperate and defiant, around 1,000 refugees and migrants marched together along one of Budapest's busiest highways, heading west towards Austria and Germany.
Our plan by go walking, we don't even stay here. We have 2 days, we don't have anything. The train, the border closed. We are what we are doing. We want to walk. By walk.
Many had spent the past few days camped out at Budapest's international train station, Hungarian authorities preventing them from boarding any trains bound for Western Europe. Hundreds of migrants spent the night on board this train, which they boarded yesterday in hopes it would take them to Germany. But instead, it stopped here, 400 kilometers from the Austrian border and just down the road from a refugee camp. Refugees clashed with police and refused to leave the train, terrified of being trapped in a camp for months. At one point, a group of refugees tried to make a run for it, fleeing the train down the tracks. One of them, a man from Pakistan, tripped and hit his head and later died. Cameras aren't allowed to film inside the Bichka refugee camp, but it's got a rough reputation. Mohammed Al-Hussein is from Damascus.
He told us, don't go. No food, no respect.
But after remaining defiant for days, these refugees have now agreed to leave the train station, to leave the train itself, and they're now lining up and boarding buses that will take them from here to a refugee camp. But as busloads of refugees arrived at the camp nearby, at another further south, some tried to escape. Police pushed back to prevent them from heading north. Well, back at the Budapest train station, a gang of Hungarian nationalists attacked the refugees camped out, prompting riot police to move in. The migrants responded by chanting no to violence.
We are facing exceptional circumstances. We need an exceptional response. Business as usual or incremental improvements of mechanisms in place will not be able to address what it is today, a massive refugee and migration crisis in Europe.
And the focal point of that crisis tonight is on that highway nearby, where 1,000 people have now been walking for hours in the dark, some of them with disabilities, elderly, young children. And the Austrian border is still a couple hundred kilometers away from here, a seemingly impossible destination. But we are hearing now that Hungary is planning to send buses to drive them the rest of the way to the Austrian border, what would be the last stop before Germany, what's become the promised land in this mass exodus. But whether Austrian officials are willing to let them in, Donna, is another question entirely.
Certainly is. And Hungary's Prime Minister made some comments today that revealed the fears of some Europeans. What did he say?
Well, Hungary's Prime Minister made those comments in a newspaper article arguing that it's important to keep the borders closed so that we can keep Europe Christian. No surprise, those comments have drawn a lot of criticism, including, we should note, from many local Hungarians who we've been speaking with, many of whom say it's deplorable the way that these refugees have been treated here. But others don't agree, and that speaks to an irony that is not lost on many of the refugees themselves, that a country, Hungary, that clearly wants them to leave, has also so far refused to let them, Donna.